time to grow with the SEO queen. Receive the perfect leads like never before. No traffic is gonna explode. It's time to grow.
Welcome to the SEO Queen Tech Show, a podcast to help you get more credibility, visibility, and profitability through inspiration, technology, and marketing insight. This podcast is for professionals and entrepreneurs who are looking to get more customers, clients, and patients. We're broadcast worldwide on Bashani Radio, iHeartRadio, and iTunes. Bashani Radio, always talking about everything from New York City. You can listen to the SEO Queen Tech Show on any mobile phone or tablet device. Also, as a thank you gift for listening to the SEO Queen Tech Show, you can always go to SEOqueen.com and book a complimentary Reach More Clients Power Strategy session. So I wanted to, first of all, before I introduce my guest for this episode, I wanted to say thank you to all the businesses that came to the Reach More Clients Power Conference, which was on Saturday, July 22nd. Dr. Boyce Watkins gave a phenomenal presentation, as did Adrian Grace and Dr. John Aiden. I have spoken with many of the attendees, and many of them said they greatly enjoyed it. It was phenomenal. They got a lot of information. They learned so much. So stay tuned to the SEO Queen Tech Show, because we're definitely going to have some conversations with Dr. John Aiden and also myself, and make sure you stick and stay and bookmark SEOqueen.com, because we have a lot more live events coming up. And one of the individuals that's going to be hitting the road with me is a man who I'd have to say he's one of the best website designers I know. He has a keen eye for detail. He is incredibly creative. He had the vision and the motivation to urge Warner Brothers, as in the movie studio that brought to you Matrix 1, Matrix 2, Matrix 3, to actually implement a user experience department. And so I know as a consumer, it could definitely be daunting when you come to a website that it makes it hard to access different things. And our guest today is Andreas Adamec. I hope I'm saying your last name correctly, but
yeah, Adamec.
He began his user experience and product design career establishing user experience as a practice for Warner Brothers Entertainment. He created B2B and B2C experiences for Warner Brothers' largest entertainment franchises. So from there, he has went to work for Coolio Software, enterprise software as a service tech startup, and then Nat Health, a healthcare tech firm with multiple B2B and software as a service and mobile applications. More recently, he's led a team of product designers as director of user experience, and now he has launched his own company. So I have to tell you, I am super excited to have a conversation about user experience with Andreas, because this is a very important piece of search engine optimization and just the digital technology ecosystem at large. And so it's definitely an honor and privilege to have him on my show. And without further ado, I want to introduce to some and present to others none other than Andreas. How are you, Andreas?
Steve, thank you so much. Thanks for those kind words. I'm great. Hello to everyone that's listening. It's a pleasure, and let's have some fun talking about UX.
So the first question that I have, and this question I think a lot of people have, because I think a lot of people throw up their online presence and really don't think about this a lot. I mean, I definitely know that this is something that it's like we subconsciously know it matters, but I don't think a lot of businesses, entrepreneurs, and brands really think about this, and that is, the user experience. So what is the user experience? How would you define that?
Yeah, so UX design or user experience design is the process of creating and enhancing the overall experience that users have when interacting with a product, service, system, site, app, anything that you can actually interact with, right? So it involves understanding the user's needs, behaviors, motivations, to design intuitive, accessible, and enjoyable, even delightful experiences, right? Um, UX designers aim to make a product easy to use, visually appealing, and of course efficient, right? They consider factors such as usability, accessibility, information architecture, interaction design, and visual design to create meaningful and positive experiences, right? So UX as a craft um, is needs to be well integrated within a company or within a process, right? Um, there is definitely the problem solving aspect about it, and it can actually be used um, on in any kind of organization size, right? I had the pleasure to actually do UX, as Z already mentioned, for a very large entertainment company, also for a large healthcare company, but then for several different size early startups where you really had to learn to, first of all, you had to really be good at what you're doing and understand that you have to wear all of the user experience design hats, right? And so that actually goes already into the second question: what are the phases of UX? Basically,
So wait, hold on. Before we go into the phases of user experience design, I want to know, I'm curious to know what are some of the best user experiences that you've experienced? Something that our listeners may be able to identify with.
Well, I would say those go up and down, right? There was a time when I would have said Apple.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I've gotten a bit angry with what Apple Music has been doing as far as experiences go.
Apple Music's interface, I have to be honest with you, it's a little confusing to me.
Yeah.
I get really lost using Apple Music, that app. But
Yeah, there is sometimes I would say I'm definitely not a friend of Apple Music.
mhm,
Um, At the same time, I was not really prepared for that kind of question either,
mhm.
because um, there is always surprising small companies that actually have really good experiences. And then you actually see large companies um, that surprisingly let you down. Like, for
So,
example, we own a Tesla, right? And
right.
one thing that's um I mean, I can tell you a lot of bad things. I can answer that. One thing that is not a good idea if you have a car user experience, user interface, is to move things around, and which is quite dangerous, right, in a car. For example, on the Tesla, which happened quite recently, was the music interface moved from the top right to the top left, and I
So
found out while I was
hold on.
driving.
So you were driving the car and that big monitor on the dash, they
Mhm.
changed the location of everything?
Well, they change things around. And, even though my wife tells me don't go into the settings while you're driving, sometimes you have to do it. Like, for example, if you need to check the tire pressure on your car, it
Mhm.
only shows when the car is warm, right? So that completely changed from one side to the other.
Oh
So
wow.
yeah, it's not a good idea. And in early day UX, there has always been the saying, don't do a Microsoft ribbon. And I don't know if you remember when
Oh, I
Microsoft.
remember. I remember.
when-
I remember before there was a Microsoft. I grew up on a PC. So,
Yeah, so when everything got changed around, right? And
mhm,
users worldwide complained because
right,
everything all of a sudden was new and in a new uh, location, and it was not rolled out in a way where people could get used to it, right?
right. It was pretty abrupt, and then they
Yeah,
switched to the tiles.
right. And
Yeah.
so I had to say I had even fights within the UX community
Hmm.
uh, where people that worked for these companies defended it by saying, but if it's better, if it's, if it's a better experience, why not change it, right? It's like, well, yeah, I get that, but you do not want to, uh, have these abrupt changes, right? And
Hmm.
throw someone off with it, right?
Right.
And I see that often, and I cannot stand it.
So I think that Amazon's UX is interesting. I think there's some things that are good, some things that are bad. I want to know from your professional experience and standpoint, what do you like about it and what don't you like about it? And then I want to know, what are the phases of user experience design?
Right. I would say one thing that Amazon has always been great at and kind of the leaders was their search bar, right?
Hmm.
Where and it got copied often, where before you actually do anything, you would search in all, but you do have that pull down on the left of the search bar where
Right.
you can
To pick the
actually,
category.
yeah, where you can focus in. I think that was always great. I would say overall, Amazon has pretty good experience. Now there's always, I mean, yes, they have a lot of stuff, right? It's very cluttered. There's a lot in there, and it's um sometimes you do get a little bit of the good old analysis paralysis thing, right? Where
Too many
there's just
choices.
too many choices, exactly. Um, but I mean, that's the nature of the beast, right? With Amazon. I would say I would still prefer Amazon to other shopping experiences. I mean, I would even say that Best Buy, for example, has a pretty good shopping experience.
Hmm.
But there is definitely a lot that I would probably want to say if I go a little more deeper in it. Nike, for example, um, I do really like Nike's shopping filtering experience. Um, I always liked, when you were able to narrow things down on the left, which has been around forever, to narrow down your search.
Right.
Um, yeah, that's pretty much all that comes to mind right now.
Well, those are some pretty good user experiences that I think most people can identify with. They've been on the websites at one point in time. So, what are the phases in user experience design?
Well, UX is definitely about understanding the users, right?
Right.
Um, and before I go actually into the phases, I always compare good UX with, for example, if you start dating someone before the holidays, right?
Mm-hmm.
And um, yeah, there is definitely the typical standards, right? Where you say, okay, for a guy, you get a tool bench, or you get, I don't know, something typical guyish, right? For a woman, you would get a kitchen item or Victoria's Secret, right? Then there's some guys that may actually say, hey, you know what? I'm actually going to go ahead and ask the person. That may not really get you there because they may just be either too busy with what they're currently doing, or not really aware of what they really need. They may say, well, I could always use some, I don't know, whatever, makeup, right? But if you actually really want to nail it, you want to pay attention, right? You want to actually spend some time with that person and really find out what they need. And that is really the core, the first step of user experience is do the research, right? That research phase is just very important, that you actually really understand the users, the needs, and the problem that needs to be solved. It includes activities like user interviews, surveys, and competitive analyses, right? Then you need to analyze that stuff, right? In this particular phase, the research findings are analyzed to identify patterns, user behaviors, and pain points. These insights help shape the design direction and inform decision-making. One big part of this phase is something called personas. So a persona is actually a fictional character that you build based on groups of people that you have researched that have overlapping needs, motivations, behaviors, influences, not so much demographics, because sometimes in that group you may have all kind of different cultures. You may have men and women in it, different ages, but they all have those overlapping needs. Sometimes you may actually want to split them up based on demographics, but really only sometimes. And so what I usually do with teams of all different sizes, I mean, with large companies, also with individual people that, let's just say, want, own their own business, to have a workshop, to have a persona workshop where I actually get them to actually, and ideally, if they have a web designer already, or if they have a salesperson, get them all together and help them to define those roles. Even if there is no research done yet, there is usually a lot of information at the fingertips of people that know their customers, and help them to actually get that all together into that one page that actually defines who that person is, but that person basically as the outcome of a group of people, right? Like, who's the primary user? Who is the secondary user? And sometimes it actually even helps to identify a negative persona who they're not designing for. That way, it really helps for them to be on the same page, to for that to actually really shape every decision that they're actually making.
Okay, so what is a negative persona?
A negative persona is, for example, defining who you're not serving, right? Who, and sometimes it may just be very obvious and sometimes not be necessary, but it really, one thing that is always true with UX is everything depends on the context. It's never a good idea to just use some cookie cutter schemes and think, shortcuts. We love shortcuts, but with UX, you want to look at the context. You want to understand. And sometimes it's good to have a negative persona to really clearly define, this is the population out there that we're not serving. For clear communication, sometimes you hire new people, and sometimes you have vendors, and you don't want to have to hand them a stack of research data or have this long conversation, but actually say, look, this is Francis, right? Francis is our primary user. Here, this is Mary. Mary's our secondary user, right? So both of them are using our system kind of differently, right? And I believe because of them, we need to have two different entry points, right? Or because of, let's just say, the demographics, or, let's just say the tech savviness, or, that's, it usually goes deeper than that. They may need a different search, right? Different navigation, for example, right? Or one is more tending towards mobile app versus the other one is definitely appreciative of a responsive website, for example, right?
Right.
So that's the personas. That's why I think it's really good to not just have that overall understanding, right? And even in conversations, when you talk to your salesperson or your marketing person, you don't want to have these long ass conversations, right? You want to be to the point and say, here, let's look at Francis versus let's look at Mary, right? So then the third point after the analysis, after you actually know where you are, and by the way, with personas, the next step after personas is a user journey, right? Because that persona now is that game player within its game.
Right.
For example, do you need to understand how they're using this app when they're traveling? What are the steps, right? Okay, they're getting on the train, they're logging into Wi-Fi. What happens when they don't have Wi-Fi connection, right? Are there certain offline features within the app? Then they're usually ending up at a convention, right? You can even think of, okay, they're using the app when they're traveling mostly outside, and there's usually a lot of sun reflection on it, right? So that kind of depends on, do we need like a strong contrastful interface there, right? Because they're not always using it in the office, right? So there's a lot of points there that you actually want to understand in different use cases, right? Then, that really shapes the requirements, right? Because requirements is usually a happy marriage between user needs and business requirements. And I mean, business requirements are important, and they're not overriding user requirements, but they're both important, right? So you definitely want to make sure those are happily married, right? And then you get into the early design phase. Design always starts with the word, right?
Right.
Just like it says in the Bible, in the beginning was the word.
Right.
That thing is true everywhere. So you start out with not just immediately going in there, and some designers are just very eager, right? And they want to immediately show their artistic skills, right? It's like, no, you got to be disciplined. That's why it's good to have a senior UX person, right? To have someone that actually either leads the process or is just as I mentioned, wearing all of the hats, right? Especially for startup, right? For startup, it's ideal to have a very seasoned UX person, because they know what the most important piece is for the moment. And they have learned the drawn out process. But for a startup, you rarely can use it, right? And you need to know what slice of that methodology you need to use for that particular moment. Then move on, put on the next hat, right? So basically, the design starts always with a list of words that then actually turns into taxonomy, right? That then turns into an information architecture diagram, basically meaning you actually see the, let's just say, about to design the application from the bird's perspective, where you see how everything connects, right? Just like if you go into a mall and see that you are here, right? It shows you are here.
Yeah, exactly.
And in these days, you actually have, teams all over the world, right? And so if not everybody looks at that map and knows about what part of that map we're talking about, oh my God, those meetings go on forever and ever. I have always been the one that came into teams that were just going back and forward and wasting a lot of time with saying, guys, time out. Let's create that map. And in the days when I'm talking about, I then went to Kinko's and had it printed out on a plotter, on a big printout, and then had sent the file to every office in different locations and had them do the same thing, and then say, okay, now let's continue. I mean, of course, you can have it on a big screen or whatever. It really depends on how complex the application is, but it's always helpful to actually understand where you are, what the interactions are. Where you connecting from here? Where you going from there? How you go back, right? And then you already see how it breaks or how it actually works. And then you start sketching it out, right? You
Right.
start really rough. And a lot of times I had to actually iterate between sketching and the flow because I kept breaking the flow when I was sketching, right? So iteration is UX's best friend. And sometimes you actually have to say, okay, you know what? We have to move on. We don't have that much time, especially with startups, right? And we'll revisit that later. And then I have to say, I still believe in wireframes. Wireframes
Yeah.
basically are the the design of
Yeah.
the application
Yeah.
with
I know some of the more popular wireframe applications are Figma, and I know I've used Balsamic before. Do you have
yeah.
one that you prefer when it comes to
I
putting
mean,
a
of course, I have to say
together?
Figma, right? Because Figma is the peak of the mountain right now. The Figma is just before Figma, it was Adobe XD.
Mhm.
Uh, but before those two, there was Sketch, and Sketch is still kind of competing, and UX Pen. But there were actually in the past true wireframing applications like OmniGraffle or Balsamic, as you're saying, right? Even Keynote was used for wireframing. But UX had to become a little bit more efficient, and design systems became an absolute necessity. Uh,
Can you
the
explain what a design system is?
yeah, and so design systems kind of killed wireframing, and I'm telling you why. So a design system basically is a um, number one, a component library where all the team members that are working on on those designs, and for large organizations especially, you have different features, you have different parts of the UI that sometimes completely different teams working on it. If they work in different design systems with different components, nothing matches up, right? So you got to make sure that all your buttons are the same, your type styles, your color styles, uh, and of course, what's great with Figma is that the program already spits out CSS for the developers. So one thing that's very important in UX is the connectedness with the developer, right? And the developers, the understanding of the frameworks they're working with, and the being very clear on what they need. And so within Figma, I've worked in Figma over the last 2 years, and it's just a great interaction with developers because like I said, it actually spits out CSS. And so a design system, in my eyes, is not just a component dump, which it often is, even though it's nice, and especially in Figma, these components are actually created in a atomic style, atomic way, where you have atoms, you have molecules, and everything is basically has its own hierarchy built in, right? So um, if you do those components right, they are they make your life much easier, right? You'll have different variants of those where you can switch on or off the icon in a button, right? You have all the different styles of that particular component baked in within it. So you just have to use a drop down and select a different style. Um, Figma makes that very easy. One thing that gets often forgotten and ignored about a proper design system is that the design system also is a pattern library at the same time, where the use of a particular element is clearly explained, when it can be used, when it should not be used, right? So that the designers don't just go and just use any kind of component for any kind of design, that they have to understand that, especially with international sites and applications, you have to be very careful which components to use, which icons to use, for example, right? And also to really define your error states, right? When the errors happen, what needs to happen for that error message to be triggered, right? And we didn't even talk about accessibility, right? Accessibility, of course, is massive in user experience design. Let's just focus even just on visual accessibility, right? There are so many different kinds of visual impaired aspects. Color blindness is such a normal, ubiquitous thing, where people have all kind of different versions of it. So there is actually a double A compliance, which is basically defined by the World Wide Web Consortium, WCAG, right? Am I correct? And so basically, there is actually a contrast checker on this on the one side. There's several different ones. I use WebAIM, where you can actually see that if your site actually is accessible, right, on the visual level, at least on the contrast level, that your colors that you're using, that you're not using a light font color over a white background, for example, right? There has to be a certain contrast that it is double A compliant. There's also triple A compliant, which you have not very much creative options anymore, because it's pretty much ends up being black or white. But with double A compliance, for example, you cannot use a standard orange with white type in it, right? In a button, for example. It ends up being like a burnt orange, right? Or when you use like a sky blue that's on the lighter side with white type in it, that's not gonna fly, right? So your designers really have to understand and have to use that tool, have to use a contrast checker to actually see if it is double A compliant at least. And then, of course, accessibility, there is much more involved, right? For example, a site has to be built in a way where the structure is easy to understand by screen readers for blind people. And it's in a way like a no-brainer, but you'd be surprised how much it isn't, right? Where you actually go through the code of a site and the flow of the code is actually all over the place, right? It's not going from top to bottom, right? And so you want to make it easy for people for blind people that use screen readers, right? And so testing is a huge thing, obviously, right? So you design something and you want to start testing early, right? You want to start testing in early phases. But one thing that I wanted to mention again regarding the wireframes is that I do miss the wireframes because a lot of times, especially with Figma, you have defined your design system already. And basically what you have then there is, because your design system is with all the defined colors, with the font styles and everything, is basically already a ready design. And the reason why we did wireframes in the old days was so when you actually presented the design to stakeholders, that they would actually not get distracted with the visuals, right? That they would actually be able to focus just on the functionality of things. And I do still sometimes just turn the colors off and strip it off the images to keep it that way.
Mm-hmm.
but still it's not like the original typical wireframe. But many companies just don't want to pay for it anymore because everything has to go so fast, right?
Wow.
Yeah. So, but testing is very necessary, right? User testing. You want to start very early. There is even the so-called, back of the napkin testing, where you quickly sketch something down and show it to someone and say, what do you think about this, right? Get some early feedback already. Um, and within that, of course, it's great to have a prototype, right? In Figma and Adobe XD, it's really easy to get quick prototypes done, to sometimes screen record it and send it out, or to actually show it to someone in person. But you want to make sure that your designs, that you immediately see, okay, what do people actually ignore? What do they not even see? What do they click on? There's even usability labs that use heat map applications where you actually can see the areas that people look at, which is quite interesting, right? So you're like, oh my God, I would have not thought that they would look here, right? So you get always some interesting surprises there.
Yeah, so
Um,
this kind of dovetail into my next question. What are the benefits for a company to hire a UX designer and really to invest time into dialing in their user experience overall?
yeah, so enhanced user satisfaction, right? Where because the UX designer focuses on understanding users' needs, behaviors, preferences, and by incorporating their expertise, companies can create products and services that align better with user expectations and leading to increased customer satisfaction, right? Improved usability, obviously, right? Because UX designers are trained to optimize the usability of products. Uh, they can identify and rectify potential usability issues, making it easy for customers to interact with the company's offerings. This can result in reduced customer frustration, right? And improved customer retention. And then, of course, that means a competitive advantage. Because in today's markets, providing a great user experience definitely sets companies apart from their competition. So by investing in UX, a company can differentiate its offerings, attract more customers, and potentially gain a competitive edge in the industry. And then streamline development. Because as I mentioned already, UX designers work collaboratively with other teams, especially with developers. But then, if you have a larger organization that has product managers, project managers,
Mm-hmm.
uh, to just ensure a smooth uh, operation, right? Like
Right, right.
product managers are the ones that understand the business.
Mm-hmm.
And even though there is often friction between UX designers and uh, product managers, there is a massive benefit for the UX designer to understand the business. And in later days, there has actually been the term introduced of a product designer. Product designer in the past has always kind of referred to what was known as an industrial designer, someone who does not just design software. But these days, the term product designer just describes a UX designer that is not just focused on the interaction between the user and a particular application and the device, but really, and especially with startup culture, really understands the company as a whole, is integrated also with marketing, understands the entire product organization and not just the interaction with a user and one device. So in the example that I brought up of the interaction of a UX designer and a product manager,
Mm-hmm.
understanding the business side is so important, right? Uh,
Right.
and so that has been something where a UX designer these days, which in my eyes is a product designer, um, to be a bit more of a unicorn, to just have a broad understanding of the company. And that really actually kind of describes what I always understood as user experience anyway, is the interaction of a user with a brand, period. Right? So basically, the brand, if it's actually well integrated within the UI, means that every interaction can actually speak the brand value, right?
Right.
While at the same time, the let's just say what's happening within a company, even if it's not seen by the user, is in a way felt by the user, the way a brand portrays itself through all of its channels, right?
Yeah, that's
And
so important.
yeah, and so then, after that point, after the streamlined development, I would also say, of course, the increased conversion and revenue, right? Like a
Yeah,
well-designed
I
user.
want to talk a little bit about that, the
Yeah.
increased conversions and revenue. How can, a optimized UX UI increase revenue?
Well, first of all, bringing bringing back the example of, you starting to date someone before the holidays, right?
Right.
You actually have a clear understanding of that user. You understand their environment. You're actually much, much more intentional with everything you actually point in that direction. First of all, you know in what direction to direct it, because you really understand their environment, you understand their use cases, you understand their needs, so you can be much more intentional, right? And that by itself opens up all of the possibilities, right? If you, for example, understand that yes, there are different groups of people using my application, and even though I define one as the primary, but the secondary is still secondary. It's not as I mentioned earlier, a negative persona, right? So now those two groups, but you also that process helps you to identify possible user groups that you have not thought about yet. So by exploring that space out there, and by being intentional, and by building those things, and by making sure you quickly validate, right? You quickly get that feedback. You really stay aligned. You spend less money. Even if it may seem like you actually spend more money up front to do it right, it'll always help you to slim down and to actually to have that speed to market. But when you do UX right, you will always end up ahead.
Yeah,
And
I mean, I really believe that it's important for businesses to invest in their brands. And I know when I invested in my user experience and my branding, I received the ROI on those dollars sometimes within weeks, sometimes within months, but the return was there and it was tangible. And making it aesthetically pleasing and useful for your website visitors to your online presence just makes sense. It just makes sense. It drives revenue. It's one of those things that's very important. So if a brand entrepreneur is listening to this and they want to connect with you for a consultation so that they can determine what slice of the UX design process that they want to implement and optimize for themselves, how can they contact you, Andreas?
I'm about to get my website ready, which is adamecdesignux.com. I can always be reached out at andreas@adamecdesign.com. And maybe you have a way to post that.
Absolutely. This is going to be posted on the thumbnail that's going everywhere. So
Yeah,
Andreas Andemic Design.
Andreas at Adamec Design.
Yeah, that's going to be posted with the thumbnail for this episode. So
And even the website, the contact button goes to that email address. So that's definitely the best way to contact me.
okay, that's awesome. So I definitely I wish this podcast was visual so you could see Andreas's portfolio, but he is quite a prolific designer. And if you want something that just looks super clean and just elegant and beautiful, Andreas is definitely the one you want to talk to because he is phenomenal. So
Thank you so much.
you are welcome. So you've been listening to the SEO Queen Tech Show, a podcast to help you get more credibility, visibility, and profitability through inspiration, technology, and marketing insight. This podcast is for professionals and entrepreneurs who are looking to get more customers, clients, and patients. We're broadcast globally on Bashani Radio, iHeartRadio, and iTunes. Bashani Radio, always talking about everything from New York City. You can listen to the SEO Queen Tech Show on any mobile phone or tablet device. Also, as a thank you gift for listening, you can always go to SEOqueen.com and book a Reach More Clients Power Strategy session. And so today, my guest has been Andreas Adamec. He is a user experience and user interface expert. Again, he can be reached at, share your contact with the people. Andreas?
At Andreas at adamecdesign.com, which is ADAMEC design.com. And on my website, which will be launched within the next few days, adamecdesignux.com.
Awesome.
And thank everyone for listening. Thank you, C. I really appreciate it. And yeah, that was wonderful.
All right. Thank you so much. And to our listeners, until next time.
It's time to grow with the SEO Queen.